might even be fuller, have a fuller agenda than the morning. Just a second. Yes. All right, so I will remind us first that we are, the University of Manitoba campuses are still indeed located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. And we just had this beautiful morning, nation-to-nation conversation with some transgenerational speakers and pan-indigenous speakers and voices, and we're very proud and honored to have you in our presence and continued presence this afternoon with the presentations that will follow and the roundtable consultations that would follow. And if you are able to stay for the afternoon, I would invite you to join different tables and be part of the conversation. That would be great. So to begin, and I'm still Lisa Landrum. I teach architecture at the Department of Architecture, and I'm also the Associate Dean Research for the Faculty of Architecture. And in addition, I am the project lead for this CAFÉ initiative. And I'm going to use my 6.5 minutes to give you an overview and background of that initiative. But first I would like to provide some gratitude to additional members who have made this all possible. So first I'd like to thank 3 students who have helped make this happen. 𝗣𝗿𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗲𝗍𝗲. Where are you? There you are, Nicola. Thank you. Nicola is the wizard behind the website and many of the graphics. Tia Watson on social media and manifestos and other miscellaneous. And Jessica Piper assisting with logistics and moral support and provocative questions, which I have to say make a lot of things happen. Students never underestimate the questions that you ask. Most of us hear them and think about them in a lingering way. So please ask your questions. Without Jessica's questions and stamina, I don't know if the exhibition would have happened in the Architecture 2 gallery, so thank you, Jessica. My sincere gratitude also goes to Erin Rawlick and Brandy O'Reilly and the Partners Program Office. Their professionalism, enthusiasm, and attention to detail makes events like this not only possible, but I would say joyful. So, and Erin has a binder, a 3-inch binder full of details with every miscellaneous thing that goes on in organizing these events. And Erin, thank you very much for all of that. And again to thank Danielle and Rihanna, members of the Indigenous Design and Planning Student Association, who led this morning's panel, and this morning's panel sponsor, who, gosh, I should have mentioned this morning, the Manitoba Association of Architecture, who made that possible. And for lunch, I'm grateful for the support of Dean Beddoes of the Faculty of Architecture. So I would also like to acknowledge that there are students and faculty members here from 4 other schools. And when I say your school's name, maybe you could just give a wave. So from the University of British Columbia, we have Professor John Bass, together with Emilia, Thomas, and Hallie. Welcome. And Hallie, of course, is a graduate of our ED program. Welcome back. And why did you go to UBC for your master's? And from McGill University, we have Professor Nick Luca and students Odile, Michael, and Olivier. Welcome. And from the University of Waterloo, we have Professor John McMinn and students Amina and Julia. Amina we heard from this morning, and Julia will be speaking to us this afternoon. And from Laurentian University, Professor 𝗍𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗲𝗏 joined us virtually this morning, and here also is Max Fox-Kupla, a graduate student. Thanks for coming, Max. Okay, so for this afternoon, as a prelude to the roundtable discussions, we have a dozen very short presentations to help set the tone for those conversations with a mix of student, educator, and professional voices. And I'll get things going, as I mentioned, with a very brief overview of what this project is and where it's coming from. So for the last 3 years, I have been a member of a national working group developing a framework for an architecture policy for Canada. Now, unlike a building code, which sets minimum standards, a policy aims high. It's aspirational, promoting design excellence and best practices with principles and case studies to guide decision makers at all levels. About 30 countries already have architecture policies or are developing related strategies. And you can review these policies on the resource section of the CAFÉ website and also in the current exhibition in the Architecture 2 gallery just next door. So Canada does not have an architecture policy, but we are beginning to have the public conversations as a necessary first step toward creating one. So upcoming discussions are planned at the RAIC conference in Edmonton this June, at the Politics of Architecture in Canada panel, part of the PopCan Crit, also in Edmonton, and at the CACB conference in Halifax in October. And last year, the working group was interviewed for Canadian Architect magazine. We launched a website called Rise for Architecture, and we presented at the OAA Empowering Change Conference in Quebec City and the RAIC Future of Architecture Festival in Toronto, among several other smaller events. So my work on this committee is on behalf of CCUSA, the Canadian Council of University Schools of Architecture, representing Canada's 12 accredited architecture programs. And the working group also involves professionals from CALA, the Canadian Architectural Licensing Authorities, and I'd like to acknowledge that John Stevenson is part of this working group, and Tone Dressen at the back as well. Thanks a lot for coming. Both of them former presidents of the OAA. In addition, there are members participating in the working group from the RAIC, the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada, including Jason Robbins, who is here. Thanks for coming. So for as long as I've been involved in this working group, we've called the initiative the Future of Architecture. The Future of Architecture. Now, as an educator, I know that students are the future of architecture. But until now, there were no students involved in this policy conversation, and I was often the only academic attending the meetings, and I knew this needed to change. So last spring, I applied for a federal grant through the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, proposing a series of forums to ensure students have a voice in a future-oriented policy for Canada. The grant was successful, so in collaboration with the other schools, I've coordinated this series involving all 12 schools in 5 forums over the course of 1 year. The first, CAFÉ Atlantic, happened on October 7th, 2019 at Dalhousie University, with student and faculty participants from the University of Calgary, Manitoba, Toronto, and Laval. CAFÉ Atlantic featured presentations by students, academics, and architects, including Brian 𝗣𝗍𝗄𝐿, who raised awareness and posed questions about regional concerns and opportunities. There were roundtable discussions oriented around a set of themes, the same broad themes which you will soon be discussing. And those themes are place, with questions about context, cultural vitality, land resources, and responsibility. People, concerning individual and collective well-being, reconciliation, memory and meaning. Prosperity, involving social, sustainable urbanism, protection, and environmental stewardship. And potential, speculating on the role of innovation, education, creative research, relationships, and partnerships. And I'll also add that it's always been our intention to have Indigenous principles underlying all of these themes. We didn't want to parcel out a separate Indigenous issues theme. We wanted it to underpin all of it. So this morning's conversation will still underpin the conversations that happened this afternoon. So the second CAFÉ Quebec, happened at the Université de Montréal, involved participants from McGill, Carleton, Laval, and Laurentian, and featured presentations by student leaders and professors, notably Anne Cormier, whose motto at Atelier Big City is "Make Architecture a Public Policy," and also Nathalie Dion, the past president of the Order of Quebec Architects. And Nathalie, from 2014 to 2019, she led an architecture strategy initiative for Quebec, which is now being developed together with the Quebec Ministers of municipal affairs, culture, and communication. So that process took about 5 years, and we are at about year 3. So these things take time. The public conversation section of development takes time. CAFÉ Ontario happened just 3 weeks ago, led by the Ryerson M.Arch class of 2021 and hosted at the provocative Sidewalk Labs. It included an exciting evening panel discussion and participation from UBC, 𝗣𝗿𝗀𝘀𝗲𝗄𝗃, Manitoba, Waterloo, and the University of Toronto. CAFÉ Prairie today is unique by amplifying the voice of Indigenous architects and students and incorporating an exhibition of policies. CAFÉ West will take place in the new downtown city building lab at the University of Calgary on March 12th and will feature an exhibition of student video manifestos on architectural agency, exploring how architects and architecture can help empower communities and human thriving. So in addition to travel for students to attend these cafes, the grant supports a website where you'll find a call for manifestos inviting you to describe your vision, question, or concern about the future of architecture. There are multiple formats, video, poster, image, and text, and multiple deadlines, with the next deadline being March 15th. And there are also multiple book prizes and a jury, so please submit. On the website, you will also find an online survey inviting you to define the issues, convey the value, share your vision, and call for action. It remains open until May 15th. Feedback from all of this, the sessions, the manifestos, and surveys will help shape the priorities and ambition of any future architecture policy for Canada. So I know that policy may not be the most exciting thing that comes to mind when you think about architecture, but policy really does encompass, empower, and restrain virtually every aspect of design. And this becomes more clear when we recall that the root meaning of policy is polis, Greek for city. So as Hannah Arendt wrote in The Human Condition, the polis, properly speaking, is not the city-state in its physical location. It is the organization of people as it arises out of acting and speaking together. So the Canadian Architecture Forums on Education create a space and occasion for people, especially students and educators, to assemble, speak, and act together, creating a kind of polis, a kind of city among our dispersed architectural communities. The recent climate strikes are a transformative initiative of the global polis, of world citizens acting together for climate justice, social justice, and the future of our shared planet. So this CAFÉ initiative creates a similar conversation around architecture, inviting communities to act together to create more sustainable, equitable, and inspiring built environments. And the CAFÉ really invites you to consider 2 key questions. What is your vision for the future of architecture? And what is your vision for the future of Canada? So thank you for participating, and I look forward to your feedback and the conversations this afternoon. And now we have a series of other presenters, starting with Jessica Piper and Tia Watson, design thesis students here in the Department of Architecture. Jessica is also the president of UMass, the University of Manitoba Association of Architecture Students, and Tia is the UMass representative on CASA, the Canadian Architecture Students Association. So Jessica and Tia.
We just want to share a little bit about our school here at the University of Manitoba. So within the Faculty of Architecture, we have a long history of designing through making that has percolated throughout our curriculum. And we want to share how this practice of making has facilitated student engagement within both our faculty and local communities.
So the Center for Architectural Structures and Technologies, or CAST, is a unique facility here at the University of Manitoba that has a substantial role to play in this narrative of making. CAST hosts visiting researchers, collaborative workshops, facilitates design builds, and acts as a host for some of the embodied knowledge of making within our faculty. CAST facilitates a hands-on approach combined with new technologies and digital fabrication that embraces both the technical and poetic dimensions of making. Just last week, we worked with 𝗣𝗲𝗀𝗲𝗄𝗏 and the Living Architecture Systems Group to facilitate an interdisciplinary collaborative workshop to design and install a project that you're welcome to engage with after this session in the CAST facility.
So this ethos of making is present in each of our design studios, and in some cases has been extended into collaborative projects that directly engage with local communities. So some examples of this is, they include discussions with local Indigenous communities for the Indigenous Housing Competition in 2017, run by Architects Without Borders. There have also been opportunities for collaboration between Canadian schools of architecture and the international design community. So this past summer, graduate architecture and landscape architecture students worked with the U of T and Carleton for an exhibition displayed at the 2019 Seoul Biennale of Architecture and Urbanism.
This winter 2018 studio collaborated with Cycle and the Office of Sustainability on campus to encourage active transportation through the design and build of bike infrastructure that can be seen just west of the architecture buildings here on campus. And in 2017, M1 studio collaborated with a local community garden initiative for recent immigrants, also here on campus, and these structures are designed for garden storage and rainwater management.
A design build finished this past summer engaged architecture and engineering students with community members from Shoal Lake 40 to design and construct a new feasting pavilion. And finally, just this past semester, we saw 2 undergraduate studios collaborate with the Lake of the Woods Brewing Company to design and build 2 fishing huts for the Canoe area.
The Warming Huts competition here in Winnipeg is also one that has a long history within our faculty, which I believe has been involved since the inception of the competition. Over the past 4 years specifically, our 3rd-year undergraduate class has worked together to create a student contribution to the Frozen River Walk here. Tia and I were part of the first 3rd-year class to engage in this ambitious project, and we collaborated with the International Institute for Sustainable Development to create a warm warming hut housing a sauna heated by a 𝗣𝗲𝗀𝗃𝗃 pellet stove. And in subsequent years, the 3rd-year class has created a diverse range of entries for this competition, including Pontagon in 2018, WAC in collaboration with Anish Kapoor in 2019, and most recently, The Cloud of Unintended Consequences in collaboration with local, world-renowned artist Eleanor Bond. Also at the Forks, as part of Winnipeg's winter celebration, last year graduate students collaborated with our digital fabrication lab, local firm Sputnik Architecture, and the Forks itself to create the installation of The Cloud at the Sub-Zero Pavilion. And the structure hosted a multitude of events and performances over the course of several weeks, shading delicate ice sculptures from excessive exposure to the sun.
Outside of the faculty, there's also a wide range of opportunities for students to engage within the local design community here in Winnipeg. This can happen through lecture series, festivals, and competitions. So the Winnipeg Design Festival is an example of one of these opportunities. In previous years, entire design studios have participated and built full-scale installations at this design festival. We've also seen students from both the graduate and undergraduate level produce installations of various scales that allow local Winnipeggers to engage with design. Nuit Blanche is another example. It's an annual one-night art festival that facilitates engagement between the design community and the general public. This festival has engaged numerous students over the years to push their design skills learned within the faculty into the realm of public art. So for example, myself and another student, Megan 𝗍𝗍𝗃, produced an interactive full-scale installation called PEG.
If any of you are interested in looking more closely at the work made within our faculty, the Warehouse Journal is an entirely student-led publication that showcases some of this collective work. And although our presentation was a taste of the work that we do here at U of M, we would love to talk more about these initiatives with you this evening at the CAST Mixer, happening here in the lobby from 5 to 6, and then in the CAST building across the road afterwards. Thank you.
Great, thank you. This evening, you can also, if you like, walk over to see the exhibition in the next building and also check out some of our Fab Lab and workshop spaces in the basement of this building. So next up is Johanna Hurme. Johanna is an architect and co-founder of the award-winning practice 5468796 Architecture based here in Winnipeg. She is a mover and shaker of all things associated with design advocacy regionally and internationally, including service as former chair of the Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce and now as RAIC Regional Director for Manitoba and Saskatchewan. She is a graduate of this program, the graduate program and ED program, and maintains strong ties to Finland, which has an outstanding architecture policy. So, Johanna.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and thank you for this invitation. So I decided to speak to an item that is close to my heart and practice, and what I believe should play a key role in the development of future architecture policy. That's the missing middle, and why it is important to sustainable development and well-designed communities that are more equitable and higher quality. I'll also touch on the tools that may help us get there. So I grew up in Helsinki, Finland, when Alvar Aalto, an architect, and not a president or prime minister, was on the 50-mark bill. I knew who he was, and that architecture and design was important about 5 years onwards. It is amazing how understanding that value can shape an entire nation. Those values then get translated the way that we build our environment, and it is evident all around us. Whether it be low-density city like Winnipeg, or one that struggles with the completely unaffordable housing market, the right type of density matters. It matters not only because compact cities are more efficient and can afford to maintain their infrastructure, but also because sensible density leads to increased environmental sustainability, livability, better physical and mental health. Like everything in life, building optimal density is a balancing act. Did you know that Paris is actually denser than Tokyo? And a study from Berlin shows that we do not need to build towers to achieve the necessary density to support our municipal economy, but rather due to increased distances required between tall buildings. 6-story building height yields the most density, that's up to 12 stories, without compromising the human scale or comfort on the street. 𝗣𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, in rethinking affordability, suggests that the form in which we build also has a big impact on affordability. And surprisingly so, building tall, where non-combustible construction methods and additional mechanical and electrical systems are required, actually decreases affordability. I believe housing is a human right, and at the moment, almost 25% of Canadian households may have affordability issues. That is nearly 7 million Canadians. Speaking of the missing middle, I've come to believe that the in-between is what makes multifamily housing attractive, and is essential in enabling Canadians to adapt to more sustainable living models in bigger numbers. And today, a vast majority of Canadian multifamily housing models include none of the shared outdoor space that allows kids to play, seniors to watch, and skiing competitions to take place. It's not surprising then that a quick survey of the best affordable housing projects in the world do not include any in North America. That it has to do with the value and our priorities. Perhaps one key opportunity for the architectural policy is to reinforce the right to quality housing. 40% of the world's CO2 emissions come from buildings, and sprawl is an enormous issue in places like Winnipeg, Calgary, Edmonton, Saskatoon, or even St. John's. On the other hand, in Toronto and Vancouver, building residential towers as a result of rising land costs often results in unaffordable ivory towers or vertical ghettos that rob the inhabitants from connection to the street life and the community. Winnipeg is one of the most sprawling urban centers in the world, and this, of course, is a direct result of the type of housing model that is built and accepted by the vast majority. To highlight that point, if Winnipeg was built to the density of Paris, a city again that's comprised mostly of 6 to 8-story buildings, Winnipeg would be near 7.5% of its current size, and we would fit all of our population in an area from downtown to Polo Park. Our infrastructure deficit is projected to be about $6.9 billion over the next 10 years. As taxpayers and citizens, we all pay for construction and maintenance of infrastructure in the periphery, and all are impacted by the environmental burden for more traffic and commuting. As it stands, we have plenty of space to direct all of our near future growth within the core area of the city. The current sprawl model is simply not sustainable. The Halifax Regional Municipality recently calculated that annual services to a suburban household cost over $2,000 more than an urban household. So if we apply the same math to Winnipeg, and if we directed all of the new growth expected over the next 25 years into our mature city, we would save about $4 billion in just municipal service costs, which in turn would help the city provide better services and perhaps take on housing programs. Another opportunity is that our demographics are changing. Today, one-person households have become the most common type of household in Canada for the first time, accounting for nearly one-third of all households. We need to serve this growing population, as in more multifamily suites to accompany the generous-sized houses we already have in spades. In North America, we're used to and feel entitled to each have our 4 exterior walls, which requires a lot of land and energy. 62.9% of Winnipeg's households are single-family detached homes. By comparison, 7.7% of Helsinki's population, a similar-sized city in a northern climate, lives in single-family homes. So why is this so hard to change? Urban planners are constrained by the fact that residents often resist the introduction of density or low-income housing for fear that it will adversely affect the value of their existing houses. The concern may lead to political opposition of new developments, the so-called not in my backyard NIMBYism. As sprawling city footprints is grossly irresponsible from a perspective of the environment. Simply put, every vote to stop sensible density in our cities, existing neighborhoods is a yes vote to global warming. Urban sprawl increases air pollution, water consumption, energy consumption per dwelling, and increases the loss of farmland and wildlife habitats. So how do we get to a better place? An important part of the challenge for architectural policy will be to ensure that there are enough mechanisms in place to hold authorities accountable. I have seen way too many policy documents in my past that are too vague, consisting of a bunch of motherhood statements without measurable performance targets. What I would also love to see is that design and architecture students are taught to understand how the big picture of missing middle shapes our entire built and natural environment. We need an army of professionals to get the message about climate sustainability, equity, and affordability across the general public and to all 3 levels of government. We need to be mindful that this issue goes well beyond individual building projects, and understanding the financial and political landscape is paramount in making any headway. Locally, using impact fees as a planning tool, creating a planning commission to help depoliticize the approvals processes for infill, or actually changing taxation from value-based to one guided by location or frontage might be some of the other helpful tools and initiatives, or incentives. But most importantly, we need measurable performance targets for each 4-year political cycle. Finally, we must start prioritizing quality over quantity, or cost over value. Quality-based selection is another tool that simply suggests that selecting the most qualified professional to do the job, as opposed to the lowest price. Having a fair fee and hours to do the job is essential for innovation, reducing long-term operational costs of buildings, and general quality of our collective built environment. So having said all this, I of course also recognize that sustainable urbanity is not the only consideration for national policy, but I must also consider quality and dignity in rural and northern communities. However, as a nation where 80% of our population lives in cities, a robust policy around sustainable urbanity is one that will make the biggest impact for us all. Whichever way we decide to shape up the future of building, one thing is clear: at the core of any development must ultimately be people, social interaction, and urban environment at the scale of the human body and mind. Thank you.
Excellent. It's a tall order, right? We have lots of work to do, which means we need your help. Thank you. Okay, next up, Julia Nakanishi. Yes, close. Nakanishi. Julia is a Master of Architecture student at the University of Waterloo and co-coordinator of Birch, a student-led organization building connections between students, faculty, and community members. Julia.
Hello everyone, my name is Julia, and I'm a Master's of Architecture student at the University of Waterloo. I'm really grateful to be here today and to be able to share some of the initiatives that I was a part of during my graduate studies. I was a co-director of Birch Center for Architecture Design, which, as Lisa just described, is a student-run initiative, as well as a co-curator of an exhibition titled Common Waters, which was developed under Birch. And in general, my presentation focuses on how architects can learn from engaging with local communities in various interdisciplinary ways. So I'll talk briefly about what Birch is and how it started, what Common Waters was, and how some of the perspectives in both those projects were applied to my own thesis research and design work and my education as a master's student. So Birch started in 2012 at Waterloo at the School of Architecture as a student-led organization that wanted to engage students, faculty, and staff, as well as the community of Cambridge, in discussions on design outside of the school curriculum. And it started primarily as an online platform that published student-written articles, which is still very much kind of a part of the organization today, as well as the online platform. A physical storefront was established on the main street in Cambridge, and the storefront is kind of a rough and unfinished space, which makes it flexible for a number of different uses. And Birch hosts a number of events here, such as student-curated exhibitions, talks, lectures, thesis defenses, among others. And often these events are kind of on a variety of topics outside of architecture. Art, this is an example of a photography exhibition. And these events are usually open to the public as well. And our team is made up of both undergraduate and graduate students, where roles and responsibilities are usually divided up among the categories of storefront management, online content, and organizing events. And Birch is set up so anyone can approach us with an idea for an exhibition, event, or article, and the team works with that person to execute that project, whatever it might be. And Birch is typically led by 3 to 4 graduate students each year. This is our team for the 2018 to 2019 academic year, which included 𝗣𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 And we were really lucky in our year as directors of Birch to have been approached by Cambridge Art Galleries. And Cambridge Art Galleries, or this collaboration with Cambridge Art Galleries, is what became Common Waters. And Common Waters started as this open-ended interdisciplinary project that Cambridge Art Galleries really wanted to involve the community in. And they reached out to us based on the events and exhibitions we had organized in the past as Birch. And together we landed on this project that would address water in a variety of ways, from the perspectives of climate change, Indigenous ties and histories, water as an art and medium, among others. And together, as two organizations, we developed a call for submissions that invited artists, designers, scientists, engineers, Indigenous community members and leaders, writers and performers to submit ideas for artwork and events. And with our student team, as well as curators from Cambridge Art Galleries, we curated those many submissions into a layered 3-month program of exhibitions, symposia, workshops, gatherings, and performances, and this ran from June to September of last year. And we were lucky to have 2 very distinct spaces with different functions kind of throughout Common Waters. We used the Birch storefront as a more flexible space that would host more of the events and workshops, and we also had the Design at Riverside Gallery, which is more of a typical kind of white box contemporary gallery, which is primarily used for static artworks. And this is the storefront on opening night, which was last June. And these are just some images of kind of the wide variety of public events that we hosted, talks, workshops. And in addition to designing physical things, Birch is very much involved in constructing ways in which Common Waters was a project that was able to evolve and change while it was happening. Because so many of the works were temporal and address very pressing issues on climate and our community, we wanted to keep some record of the discussions as they were happening. And so we designed, let me skip a slide there, sorry. We designed a website where we uploaded reflections that were written by visitors to the events and exhibitions, which is still kind of live right now. And we also designed the archive wall, which gathered physical artifacts produced in the various events and exhibited them, in the Birch space. And this exhibition of the archive wall evolved over the summer, growing in content, and members of the public were invited to add their comments, artifacts, found objects, etc., to the space. And to talk very briefly now about how all of this, all these discussions kind of influenced my education and research as a Master's of Architecture student. My thesis focused on designing proposals in rural areas in Japan that are undergoing dramatic population declines due to aging and urban migration, and these places are experiencing a loss of traditional culture and knowledge, and I was interested in how design could play a role in those communities. And so last spring I traveled to 3 communities in Japan, where I conducted ethnographic interviews with local residents, and stayed in each site for 1 to 2 weeks, gathering stories and immersing myself in non-architectural activities, such as rice farming and textile making, and getting to know the communities there. So it's going to my second home in many ways. And I made narrative site maps that spatially represented the histories of these communities, provided in those interviews, and used this research to inform my design proposals. And the final design work was very much a result of these open-ended discussions, and a significant amount of the actual design process was dedicated to conversations with non-architects, kind of similar to how Common Waters evolved in many ways. And I think the questions that I'm left with after all these experiences is how architectural education might address the social responsibilities of architects going forward. I think an integral part of sustainable design is addressing the relationships between people and place and making spaces that highlight those relationships. And I think architects have social obligations when they engage with communities to learn those things. And I'm interested in how the architect-user relationship can continue to evolve past the design of one particular building or an exhibition into longer-term exchanges and partnerships. Thank you.
It's fabulous. Sometimes as an educator, I think, gosh, the students are involved in so many things. Is it taking them away from their curriculum? But as I'm realizing more and more through this CAFÉ initiative and through thesis projects like Julia just showed us, these so-called extracurricular initiatives are becoming more involved in the curricular agenda, and I think it's the curriculum that perhaps needs to be adjusted to accommodate and recognize that more fully. Okay, next up, Sarah Cooper. Sarah is an assistant professor in the Department of City Planning here in the Faculty of Architecture. Her expertise includes housing policy, community-based research, and how to develop and implement policy with an eye to social justice.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Lisa, for that introduction. I'm really honored to be here today because I'm actually not an architect, nor am I a designer. I mostly talk about policy, which I guess is relevant since we're talking about architecture policy. But mostly I think about housing in particular, and housing policy. And so today I thought I would talk to you about home. What does it mean to be at home somewhere at different scales, in a house, in a neighborhood, in a city, in a country. And I'm going to ask some questions about what home means for creating built environments in our current context. So let's start with the question of what is home? We know that home is sweet, we know that there's no place like it, and we know it's where the heart is. So in that sense, home might be your literal house or condo or hostel or apartment or townhome or a tent or skyrise or shelter. Or it might be a bigger sense of home, a sense of belonging to a place, to a community, to a territory, to kin and to family, to a city or to a nation. And this bigger concept of home has a lot to do with the idea of security, about feeling safe and comfortable in a place that you have a relationship of belonging to. So you have a relationship, you belong to that place, and that place belongs to you. So in this sense, home is really a reciprocal relationship. It's not just a thing or a location, but it's a practice. It's a way of generating a place that has meaning and that gives meaning. And it's an ongoing process of recreation of relationships within space, of giving them a distinct meaning. So I want to focus today on two questions. First of all, can we buy home? And second of all, what does home mean in a colonial context? And I'm going to ask some other questions for you to consider as we go on through this. So first, the question of can we buy home? Home in the literal sense, in the sense of a place of good quality, affordable dwelling, is inaccessible to many people. About 12.7% of households in Canada live in housing that is overcrowded, in poor condition, or that costs more than 30% of household income. And that's almost 1.7 million households, so households, not individuals. And then there are about 235,000 people who experience homelessness every year, also here in Canada. There are a lot of reasons that people don't have good housing, but in part it reflects how we think about housing. So historically, housing fulfilled an essential role as shelter. Today, however, we tend to think of housing as an asset, as a way to speculate for financial gain. So this is true for both local individuals who might buy a house in the hope that its value will increase before they sell it. And it's also true for global investors who have no tie to a local housing market, but who are looking to make money from housing-based investment tools like mortgages, mortgage-based securities, and real estate investment trusts. So the market provides about 95% of the housing in Canada, and in many parts of Canada, where many of you are coming from, the housing is increasingly unaffordable for large numbers of people, including middle-income households. The more housing is seen as a commodity to be integrated with the market and with global finance, the less likely it is to address local housing needs. And it becomes what Madden and Marcuse have called an instrument for financial accumulation rather than an infrastructure for living. So the question of buying home is not entirely facetious. Housing and homes are fundamental to life and to living healthy, positive lives. So how can we decommodify housing and homes to create this infrastructure for living? And how can we build housing and homes that are accessible to everyone and that support communities of belonging? And when we think about home in this larger sense, the sense of communities, and the community of belonging, we have to move beyond the four walls and a roof to think about home as a place where we belong. And we can see this bigger sense of home when we look at Canada's history and present as a colonial country. So Canada reflects a long-term ongoing attempt to dispossess Indigenous peoples of their lands and an attempt to destroy Indigenous languages and ways of life. It's literally an attempt to replace Indigenous homes with non-Indigenous settler homes. And 𝗣𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗲𝗄𝗏, who's a Métis scholar at York University, has articulated this vision of home or loss of home. He defines Indigenous homelessness as the outcome of historically constructed and ongoing settler colonization and racism that have displaced and dispossessed First Nations, Métis, Inuit peoples from their traditional governance systems and laws, territories, histories, worldviews, ancestors, and stories. So in this context, home is a very loaded term with different meanings for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. We need to create new visions and new ways of being as we create new places and spaces. And Heather Dorries, a scholar and planner at the University of Toronto, offers such a vision. She argues that a non-racist city would not be based on human suffering. Instead, a non-racist city would ensure that the growth, governance, and economy and social life of the city did not compromise the health and survival of Indigenous women, men, and children. In short, a non-racist city would be understood as an Indigenous space and would provide the conditions for the flourishing of Indigenous urban life. So for those of us who work on the built environment, who literally design and program and build the communities in which we live, reflecting on our relationships to colonialism is essential. How can the built environment support the flourishing of Indigenous urban life? And how do we create places that are anti-colonial and anti-racist and that support multiple kinds of home? So one of the nice things about being a planner is it's a profession that's based in hope, and so some of these questions they don't have easy answers to them. There's no clear answer. It's an ongoing answer, an ongoing discussion. But they're fundamentally based in a foundation of hope, that we can do better if we keep working on it. And I believe that we can create homes outside the market, and we can create anti-colonial homes and places of belonging for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Decommodification, yes. All right, next up is Professor Nick Luca. Nick is an associate professor in architecture and urban planning in the School of Architecture at McGill University. His research encompasses ethnography, landscape connectivity, critical studies of design and planning, and what he calls on his website, action research collaborations with public agencies. I want to see that in action.
There's a lot to say there. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank everyone who organized the event today and invited me, and it's a real pleasure to be here. Bonjour, 𝗍𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 although I obviously on the outside I'm from the North Sea, my name is 𝗣𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗲𝗀𝗲𝗍. And I think that's an interesting story to tell in terms of the conversations we're only starting to have in Canada now around truth and reconciliation, which is that decolonization means also unforgetting some of the things that have happened in the past, both locally and at international scales. I'm going to be jumping around a bit because I'm manually advancing the slides. I'm going to try using the clicker. What I wanted to talk to you about in some detail in the next 5 minutes is how we are moving from the past into the future. And I see that we are of similar minds from this morning in terms of the theme that is of interest. How do we connect pasts and futures? And the action research to which Lisa is referring, the action research collaborations, is very much something that I find important because it's predicated on the idea of non-specialist expertise. And that's something in architecture and planning we need to spend a lot more time doing, as we've heard, I think, several times today. 𝗣𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 Monsieur, Madame, tout le monde, people who are not trained specialists have that expertise and knowledge that is incumbent upon us to pay attention to engage with, and our roles and responsibilities are, I think, to enable people toward paths of self-determination. For architecture, that means also recognizing that architecture should not perpetuate a myth of autonomy, I think. And that's a very important thing that is valuable to me because I consider myself a landscape ethnographer, as Lisa said, who does work in architecture and design through public policy and education. But primarily what I'm interested in is talking to and listening to people as the basis for conversations about futures, different futures according to different worldviews. I'll break the slideshow. Just go back in. And I will not use the clicker.
It works. Yeah, it's just the right click.
Thank you so much. McGill University is sort of a symbol of the colonial past of Canada, and in particular my Scottish ancestors who came to New France, colonized the colony, and put up this solid granite and limestone building that we see. It's literally the super tanker that we're trying to turn around with a canoe paddle. When I started at McGill 15 years ago, one of the things that I discovered is that the fact that I do community engagement was a very foreign concept to my university. And I remember a colleague turning to me, not in architecture, but at an important meeting and saying, there's a reason we have a wall around this university. So what we've been trying to do at McGill in the last 10 years in the School of Architecture and School of Urban Planning is reconnecting and decanting the university into place. And I really am fond of the work of SSHRC here which involves a lot of unforgetting. It's not necessarily that we need to discover new things, but that we need to unforget the wrongs that we've committed in the past, etc. So our current mission at the School of Architecture is, as you see here, architectural education that flourishes with research, etc., etc., etc. I just want to highlight a couple of the key terms that we have here. Obviously, we're in the business, so to speak, of educating professional architects who are good citizens as well. We do that through research, critical practice, and community engagement. And this is a very exciting time because we are actually reaching out, I think, as architects, as professionals, as specialists, as people who are in elite institutions, etc., and recognizing and acting on different forms of knowledge, etc. I'm going to give you a peek under the hood in terms of what we're doing in terms of reforming our professional education. And I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because the technical details, so to speak, won't be as interesting to everybody in the room. 1 + 3 + 2, 26 + 100 + 60. What that means in Quebec language is 1 year plus 3 years plus 2 years. That's our professional degree and the number of credits that are associated with each of the degrees. We have a junior college system called Cégep in Quebec, which means that most people do liberal arts studies in their college years and then come and do a 3-year undergraduate pre-professional degree, followed by a 2-year professional degree. But what we've done in the last 2 years, which literally took everybody at the university completely by surprise, is we said we want to change the entrance requirements so that people from elsewhere who haven't done their schooling in Quebec can come and do architectural education here without having a transitional year. So we've changed, I've done it again, look at that. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Yeah. We've changed our entrance requirements, and specifically what I think of this as interesting for is because we're in a faculty of engineering, which means that our entrance requirements were the same as those for engineers. And we've gone from having a whole bunch of chemistry, math, and physics courses, and no humanities and social science courses, to having a whole range of other science, pure science courses, and then encouraging students and indeed requiring them to take a number of courses in all of these interesting areas. Slow in the sense of catching up to the rest of the world, but progress is good even if it comes a little bit late. We've also reformed our core program in the undergraduate years to shift from structures to the climate emergency, the question of the climate emergency and energy, building environments, etc., etc. Finally, our master's program is expanding to 2 years with 4 studios, one of which is a global studio in which we're actually trying to address the question of how architecture is a form of colonialism, as has been alluded to by several of my colleagues already today. That architecture is predicated on territory, right, and on notions of territory that are based on property, ownership, etc., etc. It's a very sort of standard Anglo-American or Euro-centric view, and that's problematic. We take all of our master's students to other contexts and ask them to think about what are you enabling and what can you do to change the nefarious effects when you go into a context that is not familiar and practice certain forms of colonialism and colonization. I also want to mention a couple of things. This is as much an update for the rest of Canada. I think sometimes we don't get out of the bubble as much as we should. We are in a wave of renewal. There are 6 new colleagues we've hired, and we're moving from the past into the future in the sense that McGill is a place that historically has had a lot of historians, now has a lot of people who are very future-oriented and interested in the design questions and opportunities that face us in terms of the climate emergency, in terms of community engagement in the 21st century. The action research collaborations with different partners, civil society and counter institutions, are captured in this quick slide. Some of the work that I've done with a number of collaborators where we're actually working on ethnographies to give voice to people and generate design strategies through grassroots engagement. Very much of the sort that several colleagues have said. Some of the students who are here with us today are going to talk a little bit about our 𝗣𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀 community design workshop, which is design, build, in the field, again predicated on the notion of how ethnography can actually inform design pedagogy. The final thing I just want to say, if you'll permit me just to have one more minute, is a happy story in terms of policy. I wouldn't be from Quebec having a conversation with people from the rest of Canada if I didn't say, let's not talk about national as cross Canada. Let's talk about Canada as a federal or a countrywide thing and really embrace the fact that we are a place of many, many nations, and we need to recognize the many nations who were not recognized historically in the work of confederation, the institutional work of confederation. And embrace the fact that we have a multiplicity of voices, In Montreal, one of the things that we're trying to do, as Lisa mentioned, is move toward policies that talk about the importance of quality and engagement and interaction with different voices and different understandings of how things are and how they could be. And the final thing I wanted to say is the happy story is I was involved with the Ministry of Culture and Communications to make design integral to cultural policy in Quebec. And it's a success story in the sense that you can see here, territory, culture, design are all linked together. They're linked together through voice and agency, self-determination and empowerment. The one story I want to end with is that at the end of the process where we as the scientific committee advising this process for the ministry, the head of the Office 𝗣𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, the agency that's like the Académie française, it really is interested in making sure that French remains the lingua franca and is properly used, said, you know, we've gone through this whole process of crowdsourcing. We've talked to thousands of people, and 30 years ago you would never have believed, but the question of French has not come up. We have come to a point of success, and I think that that's where we can be standing in not too many years, if we say architecture as a design and policy preoccupation can be something that will no longer be a wish or a hope or a dream or a fear or a narrative of loss. That's something that we've managed to accomplish. Thank you.
Wonderful. I love this idea of unforgetting. It's beautiful. And also the beautiful thing about the reciprocity of future and history is that they are reciprocal indeed, and the future has a history. Okay, next up, our friends from UBC, Emilia, Thomas, and Hallie. So these are Master of Architecture students at the School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture at the University of British Columbia. Emilia also serves on the Students' Executive Council, and Hallie is chair of a student organization called FAFA for Feminist Architecture. Where are you behind the column? There you are. Come on up.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Hello, so I'm Hallie. This is Amelia and Thomas. So we're going to be speaking a bit broader about the, regional issues within Vancouver and our personal interests at SALA. So we're from the School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture. SALA is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam First Nation. It is about 10 kilometers from downtown. It is on this viewpoint, which is only a kilometer away from the beach. Our program is a bit diverse, so we have an undergraduate program that's about 3 years, and they're just starting a new form next year, starting 2020. And our master's program has a Master's of Architecture program, a Master's of Landscape Architecture, a dual degree, and other advanced studies. Our difference is that we do accept students from other backgrounds, which gives us a really diverse range of students coming into the master's program. So we want to talk about two themes looking at environmental and social activism. Those themes came up within our research looking at people, place, prosperity, and potential when preparing for this presentation. So environmental activism at UBC is primarily through coursework and faculty studies. So some of the courses involve material explorations and design build projects. So we have regenerative development, green building, contemporary practice courses, as well as a series of design builds, which range from being in remote communities, and this project here is Seashore that was done last summer on campus. Faculty research is quite integral at UBC and provides a lot of learning experiences and research projects for students to be involved in as well and hired through these firms. So lots of the faculty have their own studios, including Hilo Lab, which is Blair Satterfield. In the second image, you can see the zippered wood project that uses 2x4s. Joe Damon is working with mycelium, seeing the first image, where he makes bricks and looks at different regenerative materials. And then Annalisa has Tips Lab, which this image on the right is taken from, looking at the grid network and autonomous vehicles. We also have Adam Reisnick, who does a lot of research with new building materials and sustainable building practices. Our social activism at UBC right now is primarily independent projects and also include
studios that are focused on different social issues. So John Gass, who's here today, has done 2 different studios in Chandigarh, India. So those were done in 2015 and 2017. We also have a lot of projects looking at social housing and issues of homelessness in Vancouver, as well as some First Nations-based studios, including working with the 𝗀𝗏𝗃 First Nation studio and Coast Salish. So I'm here representing 𝗣𝗲𝗀𝗃, which is for feminist architecture. They're one of the student groups on campus, and we work on compiling a diverse guest reviewer database for professors to include crits from all backgrounds, zine nights, reading lists, and other educational materials, and we're hoping to have an exhibition this year. NOMAS is the National Organization of Minority Architecture Students, and UBC is the only chapter within Canada. They have a few design competitions, workshops, and they have organized guest lectures. We also have ARCUS, which is the Architectural Student Society.
So I'll talk a little bit about Vancouver. Vancouver is currently ranked the 6th most livable city in the world by the Economist Intelligence Unit based in London, which makes it the 2nd in Canada after Calgary. It's also the 26th most sustainable city in the world, ranked by Arcadis, which is an index that balances people, planet, and profit, and that also makes it the 2nd in Canada after Ottawa. So obviously, environmental sustainability is a very important subject in Vancouver. It currently is looking towards the Greenest City Initiative, which includes adopting the BC Step Code for energy efficiency into the building code, so that by 2032, every building will be 80% net zero. But there are still a lot of issues. For instance, many of Vancouver's top companies are in the extractive sectors. For instance, many of the world's largest companies are headquartered in Vancouver, the largest mining companies. Meaning that the city relies largely on tax revenue of environmentally destructive companies. So going forward, it's something that we have to consider how to be able to be economically sustainable while we're environmentally sustainable without having to rely on these companies. Additionally, high housing prices have forced residents to move further and further from the downtown core. And as Johanna mentioned, that has a lot of implications for energy. It's not very sustainable at all. For instance, travel distances become longer, and you have to spend more greenhouse gases to get to your job, your home, your school. Which brings me to social concerns about housing in Vancouver. And environmentally, we need to fix it, but also people can't afford to live. Vancouver is currently the 2nd least affordable city in the world. It has a median multiple of 11.9, which means that the median household price is nearly 12 times the median household income. As of the last survey, there were 2,223 homeless people living in the city, which is the highest amount since the survey started in 2005. And 80% of these people were living in Vancouver before they became homeless, so this is very much an issue of Vancouver being unaffordable. So to address this, the city is looking to do something. So currently, housing issues are driving policy in Vancouver and affecting the nature of architecture. So the 10-year plan to improve housing affordability includes things like building affordable housing, making development quicker, a quicker process, and also kind of reusing what is already there, the infrastructure that is already there, to be a little more sustainable.
Okay, so I'm going to jump to Canada as a whole and try and talk about these 2 themes on a more macro scale. We were sort of struggling with what image to put up with this slide, but it was a happy coincidence that we actually included a slide that related to Brett's website he spoke about earlier, Climate Atlas, looking at the sort of national warming of the entire country. As you can see there, with the red being 100 more days a year above 25 degrees Celsius. But yes. So Canada is very known for our sort of environment, natural environment. We've got a very diverse natural environment, and it's something we like to talk about, and nearly all of our environment is natural and very beautiful. Lots of different ecosystems, and architecture plays into this quite a bit, as was mentioned. 40% of CO2 emissions coming from buildings. So, how can we sort of start to address this? We need to be sort of potentially very ambitious. I think Brent said it very well again this morning when he said, I believe, having an attitude of sort of giving back 10 times more than what you're taking away from the environment. So really sort of pushing above net zero, sort of actually giving back to the environment with all of our sort of policies, potentially looking into sort of existing frameworks as like a guide. Living, Building Challenge, One Planet Living as some examples. Living, Building Challenge in particular is entirely performance-based, always sort of checking in on buildings after they've been built rather than just being tick box exercises as some others are criticized as. And then of course we've also got a very diverse range of settlement types. 80% of Canadians do live in urban centres, but there's also 20% who do not. So a truly sort of Canada-wide policy should be addressing all these concerns. Yes. We sort of were trying to look for some examples of work as a sort of reference point for best practice. These two are sort of, the first one is Interborough in Detroit and MIT, Arsenal of Inclusion and Exclusion, sort of categorizing and assessment of urban design and ways that it includes and excludes different members of society. Spatial Agencies is University of Sheffield documenting architecture and design practices which engage with these problems. And we were actually just over the morning thinking that it would potentially be interesting to, because it's been such a privilege to be here and hear the amazing work that's going on, some kind of higher accessibility to that information could potentially help a lot with a policy like this. And then to conclude, we just have some questions looking forward, which we thought might be intriguing to consider. Are environmental agency and sustainability adequately prioritized and taught in studio-based design education? How can our policies enhance the built environment for human and non-human occupants? Questions like these. How can a national architecture policy play in managing our increasing urbanization? Potentials detach a large potential of our population from impacted on the natural environment. So again, we're not living in the environment, so it becomes a bit more difficult to be concerned about it, potentially. And finally, sort of the social questions we had. Who's being sort of privileged and deprivileged with architecture policy? Where is it sort of weighted? Which memories and histories do we want to acknowledge? And again, in education, where are we focusing our sort of criticalizations and design energy, really? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to say I was totally delighted when I flipped through your slideshow and saw these questions at the end. They're very beautiful. And regarding the issue of how to get conversations like today's out more broadly, we're aiming to do that, and I am getting inquiries about possibilities. And one of the things we started to do in the exhibition next door is to put a cycle of slideshows of past student presentations. So with your permission, I will add all of the student presentations to that show, and we're looking for venues to show it, but it will certainly go on the website. All right, thank you. Next up, Monica 𝗍𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗍𝗍. Monica is an award-winning landscape architect and principal at HGFC Planning and Design. She is a strong advocate for inclusive design and serves on multiple organizations, including the Winnipeg Arts Council for Public Art, Winnipeg Urban Design Advisory Committee, and Storefront Manitoba. So, Monica.
Thanks, Lisa. I have also been this morning and just want to say that I love being back at school. I wish I could spend way more time here. It's super inspiring and really makes me have even more hope for the future. Today I'm going to share a little bit with you some things that we do as practice research and practice education, because I don't get here a lot. And then some thoughts I have about a national architectural policy. So let me start by saying that HDSC has always been about connecting people in place and about a land-based practice. We are landscape architects and land use planners. And we really believe in being active parts of the communities we work with and connecting with them. So today I'm going to share what I believe we can do to influence better places for everybody and that connection for better prosperity and better sort of understanding of each other through three hats I wear. So the first hat is as a practice educator and a lifelong practice learner. Every project we do at HDSC is an opportunity to connect deeply with those who will use the spaces that we create. And we spend a lot of time trying to connect to the final end user, not always our client, in fact. And in working and going the extra mile, as in an example here of Nordell School, a local school in Winnipeg, to not only build a landscape, but to really try to instill in the students in that school a love of landscape and a connection to nature. With something as simple in this case as adopting a tree and taking care of it and giving it life. We were having a lot of trouble with children destroying trees. And the minute that we educated young minds about the value and the life cycle of a tree, it would be amazing to know that we had 0% mortality of the trees in this project in the first 5 years. Another example is in Norway House, and I've been practicing for 20 years, which is crazy for me to say because I don't feel that old. But what's amazing to me is that I have to remind myself constantly to enter each project with humility and an open mind, which reminds me of this morning, and to listen and to absorb and to convince people who like to move at a fast pace, like our funders, that good things take time. So in Norway House, we have spent 5 years really getting to know the community, and in my case, connecting with local craftspeople, builders, and knowledge keepers, so that almost the entire landscape development around this All Nations Health Center, which is actually a model for connecting Western medicine with traditional knowledge and traditional healing practices, can be built and taken care of and owned by the community, not by outside contractors. Another way that HDSC kind of practices education is through taking at least one project every year that addresses idea of urban sustainability or green infrastructure and doing a project about it. So the slide here is a very small rain garden in collaboration with Save Our Seine, which is a nonprofit, where we connected seniors groups in the Louis Riel School Division and taught them what a biofiltration system is. They built it, and then we planned for a process where for the last 4 years, they have been monitoring and taking care of it and tracking its evolution because it's a living system. In 2018, our office organized a youth studio, which was really meant to introduce young minds in the downtown Winnipeg from all parts of the world who live together to the idea that they can really impact their physical environment. We really believe in seeding the idea that design is a great profession at a young age. We also really believe in raising awareness with politicians about how impactful this can be. Another way our office does this is really through committing to and spending time, additional time, in bringing together various and diverse groups of people who you would think don't necessarily always contribute to city making, including activists and architects, restaurateurs, musicians, to talk about living in a city. So our office ran a duets feature and a landmarks feature in the Free Press for the last 4 years. And one of the things I'd like to say is that I really hope and I wish, and this is maybe something to take back, that academics doing such amazing research here would actually put that research out in a very accessible and consumable way to the public, because I think that is a way to start changing cultural norms and attitudes. So I hope you do that. I'm going to kind of move a little bit into some other things that we do and that I believe in. I believe that having fun, collaborating among all disciplines is a very important way of organically changing public understanding and appreciation and a craving for good design. Events such as the Winnipeg Design Festival, which has already been mentioned, kind of breaks down artificial silos and brings us all together to just enjoy good environments. And it really starts to break down insular communities just through having a little bit of fun. Mode Shift, which was another sort of celebration that took place last year, was an interdisciplinary effort by many design professions and other kinds of activists. And it's really a way of, again, getting out in the public in a fun and interesting way and in an experiential way, all of the things that we're trying to achieve as professionals. The other hat I wear is advocacy. I started as a LASA student rep when I was here, and I've served on many boards, as Lisa has noted. But about 6 years ago, I decided to commit to the Manitoba Association of Landscape Architects and sitting on their board for 6 years. And in that role, what I really tried to do was figure out a way to advocate for the profession, which is not as big as architecture, by collaborating. Parking Day is an initiative that MALA puts together for Storefront Manitoba every year. It was very exciting for me to hear last year that through the Marketlands Design Competition, Centre Venture is actually considering an interdisciplinary design center that would give equal footing to all the professions and bring them together. I think I already mentioned this, but I'm going to mention it again. My passion for instilling awareness in the interface between the built environment and the power of design, especially on the young minds, led to a collaboration with the Winnipeg Architecture Foundation on Color Your Landscape, which has been a super successful little coloring book for families and children. And that has created and brought a lot of joy to kids as they learn about the fact that the landscapes that they experience every day are actually designed by somebody. I'm also super proud that this particular little book, in collaboration with the Manitoba Teachers Society, was distributed to every school in Manitoba a few years ago. Which brings me to research. Eventually, I moved on from the Manitoba Association to the National Association of Landscape Architects, the CSLA. And we talk a lot about practice research in our office, which is difficult to do, but we do try to do it, and we try to find funding to do it, to follow up on or learn more things as we're trying to develop our practice, as our knowledge base grows. And as landscape architects in Canada, we've been very fortunate to have the Landscape Architecture Canada Foundation, which gives out up to $200,000 of money, grants every year for research, and that's interdisciplinary or academic or student-based, and they have categories. They also do research on why landscape architecture sometimes falls through the cracks, and I felt it was important to talk about this, which is basically because we're not seen as a science, we're not really seen as a full arts and culture thing, and people don't know what to do with us. We're often not funded through the STEM programs or the arts and cultural federal granting programs. So just having this knowledge has given us enough sort of incentive to start advocating for how we make our way into each of those programs so that proposals from landscape and landscape architecture based point of view are considered. Someone was talking about a speaker series and a connection. We're very fortunate to have the Landscape Architecture Foundation in the US, which is much larger than the LACF, and together we've developed a very large online speaker series so that if you can't make your way to these lectures, you can at least get that information online. Despite minimal resources, the CSLA does a lot of work on a volunteer basis to develop position papers, action plans for their membership, as well as for government agencies to move our research and ideas and profession forward, including livable communities, resilience and climate adaptation, reconciliation. The LACF funded our participation in the Prairie Climate Atlas, so very similar threads. And none of that matters if you don't communicate, which if I didn't mention it once, I'll mention it again. So we work very hard at the LACF and the CSLA to communicate through many means, but especially just to introduce people to what landscape architecture is. It's amazing how people use the landscapes we design every day and have no idea somebody designed them. And so part for us, education is sometimes just public awareness. We've developed a Canadian Landscape Charter, which talks about many of the things that we talked about today, about our values and relationship with the land, about how we move forward, both on a national level and a regional level, and what our perceptions of the land and land ownership are. And it's just, again, one other common thread that I see. One of the things we've started to do and take cues from organizations that have been way better at this than others is we have started really tracking the federal budgets and provincial budgets of the government. And every year the budget actually has a theme, such as this year's climate emergency. And as the Canadian Society of Landscape Architects, we actually develop a recommendation for the standing committee developing the programs that fund projects on how landscape architects should be included as a baseline even in the call for proposals related to that. And that brings me to something that maybe is a little different, but I really believe in, which is we need to educate and allow and encourage our professionals to become politicians. I know that sounds weird, but I really think that there is a way to enact change from within. Glenn Murray, who some of you who are old enough may remember, is not trained as a designer, but has that kind of public policy and planning background, and drove the city of Winnipeg towards a certain kind of development while he was in power. I'm going to share with you a little bit about the guy at the bottom, whose name is 𝗣𝗿𝗲𝗀𝗲𝗀𝗀. Rob went through landscape architecture here with me. We worked together at HTFC, and he began developing a relationship with the �11𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 Nation, where they were trying to protect and preserve a very rare bog environment that has wild orchids growing in it. And he left us because he felt a bigger calling to go on to serve in government. He's now the Director of Parks and Protected Areas for Manitoba. And he has taken his education and he's done two things that I think are remarkable, which are proof of why we should encourage people to be in politics, which are, he has helped in the next 10 years to designate a third more provincial parks in northern Manitoba that become protected areas through policy for Manitoba. And he has taken his passion for this little broken head project and brought it forward as policy as to how the provincial government partners with First Nations to develop ecological projects. And this project on a First Nations land is open to the public. So it creates this connection and this education. You guys can drive out there anytime and learn and see from this. And to end with, I've been really struggling, very much like Johanna, with the fact that I grew up in Eastern Europe, and I've realized that in the culture I grew up in, design was in every pore of everything we did. My parents talked about the building web and the square of the dinner table. And when I moved here, as I grew up here, I moved here when I was 10, I began to realize that people here cared much less. And then I went into architecture school and ended up in like that echo chamber or a bubble where we all believe the same thing. But I married a non-designer. And every time I leave that bubble, I realize that we really need to reach out, because if we don't do that, nothing's ever going to change. And as some of you may know, we had a big sort of referendum on Portage-Maine a couple of years ago, and I felt really defeated. And so I said to a friend of mine, what are we going to do? Like, I don't know how we move that stick forward. And he said to me, read The Power of Habit. And I know this is going to sound super crazy, but you need to read The Power of Habit. Because what it basically says is that at some point when we've been doing something over and over and over again, instead of our brains being fully engaged in what we're doing, it's a habit that is an ingrained, almost reflex response that we don't think about, things that we think we're doing intentionally. And in order to break that pattern and to change, we have to become aware of it and then break the chain to set up a new chain. And I thought, oh, well, that's great in my personal life for many reasons. But what's amazing about this book is it extrapolates it to organizational behavior and then moves that forward into why large movements and social change can happen, why activism eventually reaches a tipping point. And so I think we need to somehow instill a new cultural understanding or belief in the power of design by changing sort of the public's habits. Thanks.
Fabulous. Certainly through conversations like today, we're making interdisciplinary discourse more of a habit. Thank you. Advance, yes. All right, next up, Max 𝗍𝗲𝗀𝗀. Close. You 𝗍𝗲𝗀𝗀. 𝗍𝗍𝗀𝗀𝗀. That sounds so much better. Max is a Master of Architecture student at the McEwen School of Architecture, Laurentian University, and he's visiting us from a co-op position where he's working in Nelson, BC at the moment. So take it away, Max.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. Today I'll just be talking a bit about my experience at Laurentian University in Sudbury, Ontario, even though I'm not working there right now, I'm working on Nelson, BC, but I want to discuss a bit about the topics of people and place as they relate to architecture, as our program has a very heavy focus on that, and how including those topics in the discourse of education and architecture can have a positive impact on the profession moving forward. You might have heard a bit this morning from 𝗍𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗀, our director, if you were here, about the program, but talking about a bit of my own experience. So the school is located in Sudbury, Ontario, which is a big mining town, so that's the super stack, the tallest smokestack in North America. There was a whole series of the destruction of the landscape and regreening that happened in Sudbury. So there's really strong environmental focus going on there now, moving forward. So when we're doing a lot of our projects focused on the city, we really have a strong environmental focus in looking at what Sudbury is as a place. And one of our projects very early on in second year is building wigwams, looking at a traditional vernacular architecture to inform our designs. I feel this is really important because it gives us a sense of the place that you wouldn't otherwise get, because as an architect you need to understand the place from an architectural sense. And this is a traditional structure, so really it's so important for us to understand that to then move forward in designing buildings. Another project we do is building a birch bark canoe with a local elder. I actually had the honor of building 2 in my program studies so far. And this is really brings about a sense of community, because working with other students and with the elder, we had lots of guests come in and talk to us and give their teachings and knowledge. And this is sort of a great sharing experience that we're able to learn from each other. In that sense, we're coming together as people and collaborating with one another. So really that collaboration is just such a strong focal point of the program, that not only do we study the place and implement the architecture on place, but we look at the people and how you can interact with people and understand them to then create an architecture for them. So just like you have many boats for many different places, it's important to understand the people there in order to design for them and create the right type of architecture. That's kind of what I've been learning. These boats are from Louisiana, so very different from the Birch bark canoe, but they serve the same purpose in carrying you across the water. We also have a very strong design build focus at the school. So we do warming huts there as well, like we do here in Winnipeg. This was one that I worked on myself in my first year. And that really brings the community together. Out on the ice, a lot of the community in Sudbury will come out, skate on the paths, and then it really opens up that dialogue a bit more between architecture students, the faculty, and just normal people in the community, because I feel like there's a big gap between just society and architecture. I myself took on an additional project where I designed and built a bench for the city of Sudbury, working closely with the city councilors and the community members who were interested in having this project take place. So rather than just having, a boring bus stop or a bench waiting for you there, I worked with one of our knowledge carriers at the school to design something more interesting, more robust, that could be placed in the community. We also had our own parking day. My group that I worked with, we had a very interesting idea to pull apart all these different images of old images of the downtown Sudbury. A lot of historic buildings were destroyed, which is very unfortunate. And a lot of the pictures of today, and pose questions to people in the community of what now, what next, what do you see in Sudbury, what do you want to see happen? So really thinking of bringing in people to collaborate with us on some of these big ideas moving forward. We also have a Nuit Blanche. This was an installation I worked on. It just brings a lot of people from the community together, again, discussing architecture within our school. And just having fun design projects, fun art installations, just bring people in. In my own work, I had the opportunity to go to New Orleans in Louisiana and sort of study the landscape there, talk with a lot of the indigenous groups, and I was able to design an interactive boat building workshop that different boat builders from different areas, such as the one I worked with for the canoe, and the local boat builders who come together and teach people in an architectural setting. As well, I worked on a tall wood residential structure for downtown Sudbury. There's not really a lot of people living in the downtown. It's kind of become a dead zone. So this project was an attempt to bring more people into the downtown, provide housing for them, shops and interesting things to do that would bring people through the community, all with an environmental focus. So using mass timber in a tall wood structure and focusing on the scale of people in that environment, the detail that would bring it all together to make it happen. So in that sense, we got both the technical and the social aspects to be included in that project. We also have quite a few opportunities to travel to broaden our experiences. I find that bringing those perspectives together is a really important part of the education, so that we can understand what all these different ideas are, and bring them together so that we can associate them in our work. For example, rural Louisiana, thinking about people and their communities and how they live in a rural setting, and how that can be influential on ideas in urban planning as well. Having people in their own vernacular, sort of building in this way, out on the water, versus social housing in a city. How these people interact with one another, and how we can use architecture to support that, to bring people together, make it easier for them to interact, and provide a comfortable, healthy living environment. So with all these ideas in architecture, we should really move forward to bringing sustainability through these senses of people and place ideas, so that we can have a cultural, social, environmental, and economic sustainability in architecture. And I feel that starting with the education of the next generation, myself included, we can really push forward in making a policy like this happen. We can include all of those aspects of sustainability. I feel that now I'm in quite a rural environment, the mountains, living in Nelson, BC. It's a beautiful place. Being able to work in the profession, I'm seeing how, going off of the conversation this morning, non-Indigenous architects are working with Indigenous peoples, and that it can be done in a collaborative and welcoming environment that works for everyone, as long as people are properly educated and understanding of one another, and we can come together and make this happen. There's the office now where I'm working. I helped design the structure as well, which is why I got it in there. Just a bit of pride that I'm seeing this all kind of come together, and I am enjoying the profession and looking forward to moving it forward with talks like this. It's very exciting. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for hosting me here in Winnipeg. It's been a wonderful experience so far, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussion today. Thank you.
Gosh, every time I hear students from across Canada speak, I think, if you...
So I'm just going to kind of go through these, beginning with the artisan. The artisan is a role that architecture there will always be a role for the artisan. Wealthy patrons, for private or philanthropic reasons, will always sponsor the creation of collective or transcendent works of architecture. But few get to this lofty perch, often having to climb there without a net. Case in point is a work like the Pack House in Vancouver. I just want to share a very short example of their recent production. Starting in 2010, when many of you are probably familiar with the Winnipeg skating shelters, they started just bending wood. They weren't getting paid to bend wood. They didn't have a client that asked them to bend wood. They just wanted to bend wood. Then they started bending metal. And they started to study the kind of isometric and other kind of physical properties of the materials and how they bent differently. That eventually turned into a commission from 𝗍𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗀, a very kind of high couture Ginza Tokyo showroom to design dressing rooms. That then proceeded to the Genomes project. Along the way, in parallel, I'm reading as you're actually trying to, or reading my text as you're trying to read what's on the screen. But John Packhouse talking about how they were interested in just doing it for their own sake. This represents operating without a net, folks. There's no money in doing it for yourself and doing it for your own curiosity. But eventually that sort of got woven into a more parametric and what I would call a fairly state-of-the-art application of BIM and just computational kind of tools that we have available to us now. And from that project resulted the Temple of Light, which was built in Nelson, Max. You may have been there. And it's quite a beautiful example of how that early research within a 6 or 7 year time span produced this work. So this, again, that's the model of beauty, the artisan, the kind of architect in its kind of classic formation. But the ecologist, and now I want to get into three that are more pressing, more about what's going on today. And we've heard lots of people talk about the climate. And one of the problems architecture has is that we're so constrained by property, by capital, that we can't actually engage these things at scale as individuals. And it's really up to our professional bodies that are going to make the case to do that. So I agree, Monica, it's about politics. We are able to produce these kind of one-off projects that demonstrate kind of what we ought to do. In the Francois Roche project of a water buffalo powering basically 3 light bulbs and a laptop somewhere in the jungles of Thailand is a good example of the futility with which we operate as close to the possibility of our limits as we can. Typically, what we do are very much sort of checking off boxes. And I think that's a real problem, a greenwashing problem, despite all the good intentions that result. And I asked my now retired colleague Ray Cole, some of you probably know him, whether he could name a single architect who is practicing in the world today, who practiced what he would call a deeply ecological model of practice. He couldn't do it. That says something about the problems we face as a profession. And I did ask his successor, and he came up with 𝗣𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗲𝗀𝗀, who's a Parisian-based firm, who basically are doing renovations at scale of modern housing blocks that can be kind of retrofitted, reprogrammed, upgraded thermally, etc. That's a project the profession could take on. Like to do that at scale where you can actually make a dent in the carbon footprint. And so I think this is the one example, Landrum, who mentioned earlier talked about. Just very, very dry work, very technical, very kind of needed, and really important that I think our young generation of architects kind of get clarity on, not to mention us older people. Another model, the industrialist, is kind of centered on all the kind of opportunities that we see coming up and promise, really, maybe finally we're going to have some ability to mass produce off-site buildings at scale, affordably, efficiently, well-designed and constructed buildings. We'll see. But there are examples of these things playing out. And so Michael Green, who developed his research over a number of years, maybe a decade or more, on mass timber, sold 49% of his practice to 𝗍𝗄𝗀, who's a startup in Silicon Valley. We're capitalized to about $2.5 billion. They have big plans. I think they're thinking of themselves as the Amazon of architecture, if you will. And so they're rolling out factories all over the Middle East and India and in the Western United States, respectively, precast concrete and mass timber. So they're betting, and their investors are betting heavily that the construction trades can be disrupted profoundly. How are we as a profession going to engage that? How are students going to start to even think about how they might engage or kind of surf into that current, if we think of this future as being primarily about off-site mass fabrication. Those are definitely another model that I see coming down the pipe for the profession. And then finally, the activist. This is an image of a group of school kids, Bangladeshi school kids in a poor neighborhood of London, who were organized by architects and urban designers in Rough Studio Art and Architecture to basically do digs on the site. This site was the memorial park. Somebody was shot at the site on the Altai. And they made it, their job, as they saw it, was to catalyze a whole set of actors. So this model is not about design as much as it is about networks. And it's about kind of producing collections of people who have individual skills and who can bring their expertise to bear. It's really about, it's a practice model where your ego is left at the door and really you think about shaping relationships between people. And I see that as a growing opportunity for those who are interested in the practice of architecture. And a firm like Assemble, also based in the UK, there are many of these firms coming up. Interborough was mentioned earlier, Emergency Architecture is another firm, but there are a growing number of these activist collectives really that are doing work that are outside of the kind of regulatory kind of system. And you have to, actually. These are highly hands-on projects. They transformed the gas station and turned it into a theater. From here you just see them building things from the theater. So anyway, these three latter models really pose a dilemma for regulators and their enthrallment with capital. If a regulator if any regulator remains mute in its conservatism in the face of these kind of rapidly changing environments within which we practice, my contention is they'll become irrelevant. Already, firm consolidations are threatening to reduce the number of required architects to a handful. And I think we're going to find that if communities and publics are less and less convinced of the relevance of architecture, we're going to see lots more projects getting built without the need of a stamp because software can design buildings blocks. It's this close to happening already. So what would I suggest? Figure out what your values are, whether they're in industry and technology, ecology, working kind of in bottom-up community ways, or being an artist. I mean, I think any of those four are valid and necessary. So, but you really have to kind of drill down deeply into them and not try to think of them as, oftentimes we hear about these as we are as the synthesizers. No, you have to drill down deeply in order to really get at the core of what these things can do. And I think Michael Green's practice is a good example of that, where he really did go deeply into the material of wood and the technology of it. And I think he's potentially going to make a change. And he's the person who convinced me that you need to clearly state a value, and then you can communicate clearly to the public. So the research matters. It isn't just something you're asked to do because it's like brushing your teeth. You have to develop a body of work. And then finally, yes, and I will admit finally that, even though they might not say so, any ecologist worth their salt is also a great artisan. So I don't want to hear about we all do these things, we're all doing all these things. I know that, but don't let anybody else know. Choose something and push the point home. Thank you.
Wonderful. I think our next speaker definitely dips his toes into all four of these categories, but maybe the activist in him will come out most forcefully in the next 6 minutes. So Vince Bridgman is an architect and co-director of Bridgman Collaborative Architecture, together with Ray Bridgman, a professor in our city planning program, and he is an activist on many levels, a heritage activist or advocate for accessibility, and is also a visual artist. Vince.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So, the way we communicate to people is essential. And so Ray and I decided that for this talk we would talk about some visual kind of graphics, some sort of graphic stories that we've been publishing in the paper to see if we can reach as many people as possible and about things that we felt pretty passionate about. And it comes out of a long time of saying, making public work. So what do we do when we're trying to reach a lot of people about changing a metaphor of their lives, of the way we see a city? Well, this was the first, one of the first articles. No one's laughing. It's a cornucopia, and it's not, when we published it, CBC cut out the colonialist figures that, by the way, are prominently at City Hall. They're just from a painting. And said, why is it that we don't understand garbage in a way that is deeply respectful? So we then we studied a little bit about what Carleton was doing, about teaching people how to recycle and how fantastic it is. But we changed it because we had an idea that if we could change the metaphor of garbage from a can in the corner to a glorious fountain that entered into our city streets where garbage was like water, where it poured down from the heavens, we drank it, we bathed in it, it went back up into the heavens and came down again. Wouldn't that just be a change of things? At the city in Winnipeg, where we get our permits and where planning happens, it's named Fort Garry Place. Now, Fort Garry was the place where General Wolseley came in and destroyed the initial settlement that was occurring in Winnipeg and the Métis Nation. So to have the building department there seemed a little strange, but even stranger. Does anyone see anything a little stranger? Does anyone seem a little white? So we decided we really had to change that, and we didn't. We just had to do it visually. The second part of this was that there was a kind of a crazy thing that happened where inspectors were going out in Winnipeg and going to Canadian Tire and hanging out for long hours, and the manager said, well, we don't know where they are. And we realized that, maybe the thing that we could give to John Kiernan, who is the head of the planning department was a thing to say, hey, maybe the building should reach out and look at the city and should maybe reach out as other planning departments do. So we publish these things with the hope that the metaphor of some of our institutions that are so important to us that we somehow forget about we can reach out, and I'm a deep believer in some humor. So people don't stop at crosswalks. And the reason why our cities are designed pretty much the way they are is that traffic engineers have an idea about what makes people go, or I meant cars go. And we liked the idea of creating a hologram for pedestrian crosswalks because, as we all know, the Wizard of Oz didn't know how to get back to Kansas, and we don't know how to stop cars. But we had an idea that if we could just take the beauty of physics, the beauty of having one ball hit another ball, hit another ball, hit another ball, and go back and forth, that maybe all those bored drivers would actually pay attention. Maybe they would look at the beauty of things and, stop. It was a ridiculous idea. But then we said, well, maybe if people just took the metaphor that the city was made for speed and efficiency, and if we kind of just got some hunky-looking people wearing t-shirts saying, I took the 5-minute challenge. Now what does 5-minute challenge mean? It means you take 5 more minutes to get to work. But maybe you just made that sexy. I took 5 more minutes to get to work. And that kind of came out to this thought of saying, what would happen if we could create a horn, a third horn in a car that said, whoa, buddy! What happens if we had a bike horn that said, hey, whoa, buddy! What happens if we learn as pedestrians, when we saw someone do an infraction, to say, hey, whoa, buddy! So we decided we'd publish it. And then, what about the metaphor of sharing the street? We talk about it a lot. But what happens when we don't share the street? Like, people die, people get hurt, but how do we remember, how do we change our city? And what would happen if we had some markers that said where we did not share the street? So this is a kind of a way of asking people, what is it that is happening that is wrong, that we can maybe participate together doing? And so when we were working on a planning study for North Point Douglas, the first thing we did is ask people about where some area was unsafe, and we photographed in our workshops this, and then we made an agreement together to spend a year taking 2 or 3 spaces and developing them in a way that would document every day of the year how we, in small ways, each day made them more safe. And this was an agreement with the 𝗣𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗲𝗏 and the Birch Clan and with Women's Center and with Residents Association and with other community members to say that you could create a book of maybe just 2 places in a place that was thought of unsafe, that over the course of the year would document and say every day was important to make it safe. We tried it another way because we were so impressed by the 𝗍𝗏𝗀𝗏 work in stacked in Toronto, because Winnipeg has 40% of the downtown is for parking lots for cars, and that makes it unsafe. And so we worked with an institution to try to think, how would you temporarily create retail in a space that would make as much money as car parking? It's almost impossible. We then set up another metaphor was to say, we very seldom represent ourselves. I just realized I'm crossing my legs as I'm talking right now. We very seldom represent ourselves with legs crossed. Why is that? Because it's a moment of vulnerability. And what happens when we have biology? Well, many people seem to feel that biology is a vulnerability. And it certainly is something which can inhibit people from enjoying and being enriched by being together downtown. And this grant here says, like over 100,000 Canadians, I have colitis, I need public toilets here and now. There's two parts of this image that we put, Jason 𝗣𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗲𝗍𝗍 worked with us on this one, with getting people together, and then I photographed, and we figured out ways with the biz to rent some of these stations. But what we thought was, we need to actually put these images right where people worked, right where it was important. And Grant had worked in this building right to our left. It was important, just to the left of the picture, and it was important to him to say he was essentially chained to that building because of his condition. Jenna Wirsch said, because shit happens. In 𝗍𝗍𝗀𝗍𝗍𝗍 building, which is just behind it, 𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍 was kind of a famous Winnipegger, because he was a person who really insisted that Jews be allowed to come to Canada in World War II. So it's really important that, like, okay, these are about toilets, and about maybe, we need public toilets, but it's really also about what are the things that all of us need as human beings. This was Chris Burroughs, and it was one of the amazing things she said. She was really bedridden, and she said this was one of her last social activist things she wanted to do, was to come out and be photographed. And then she loved the University of Winnipeg, and she could never find a toilet there that was big enough for her caregiver to. This is not against the University of Winnipeg, this was just a situation. But she just wanted to make sure that she announced to everyone that she needed to have a washroom that was public, that her caregiver could come to. We did figure out a way, unlike all the other projects that I've shown, getting funding for this one. And this was a public toilet. It was with the downtown biz, and it was a low mission. It was important because we had ambassadors, and this little top was a pop-up, and it was kind of fun. We also figured out a way to make money from it for the city by putting big signs, but unfortunately the city didn't allow us to have those big signs. So we are now currently fighting with the city. No, actually we're working on a committee with the city, and we're almost there to be able to have signage that would provide operating costs for these toilets, but they're kind of important. The University of Manitoba students had this beautiful idea of having waiting toilets on Winnipeg. It's not waiting on a parade, it's an invasion. What's important is to say that these are metaphors that when they capture our imagination, when people laugh, when people enjoy images, they become part of something that we share together, and I think they're actually part of a habit. I think they're part of a way of rethinking what metaphor is. And although Ray and I and our team have been doing, for almost 40 years, we've been working on activist buildings and really having a great time doing it. It's funny how these particular series of articles are trying to crystallize things that we feel are important, that we all have a way of talking about it that is not earnest, that is not feeling as though we're being squeezed, but actually feeling like we can laugh about issues and we can change. We can make city change. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Wins. And just to reassure you, this symposium will also include a restroom break. But after one more presentation, our last presentation, so Odile, Michael, and Olivier are visiting from the university, from McGill University, where they're active members on the Undergraduate and Graduate Architecture Students Association. And this will be nice because it also sort of brings us full circle. They were participants in a past CAFÉ Quebec in Montreal. So welcome.
Thank you. So we're very happy to be here today and participating in this initiative. We think that it's really important to get a variety of people's perspectives on these issues, both the students, instructors, and professionals, which is why we're happy to give our perspective on these issues and how potentially McGill is contributing to a future of architecture that is unique. So, like Lisa said, we participated in CAFÉ Quebec, at the University of Montreal, where we talked about a lot of things, but that we found approached topics which were very complex. Complex issues that had no really easy answers. And so, thinking broader about a national policy of architecture for Canada, we think it might be an extremely daunting task, especially when there's so many issues to cover and no easy answers. And so that led us to what we held previously, which was a mini cafe at McGill University, which is where we talked about specifically about the curricula at McGill, both undergraduate and graduate. What are the benefits and shortcomings of these curricula? And so that somewhat influenced the rest of the presentation, where we're going to talk about some certain classes where we feel are pushing the field of architecture into an interesting direction. And so starting with this class, Architectural Modeling, taught by Professor 𝗣𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗲𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍. She incentivizes students to think critically, reflect critically about histories and contemporary practices of building information modeling, and develop tactics for subverting software imposed constraints through focused work on 3 technical and conceptual conditions of building information modeling, which are vocabularies, objects, and translations. And so these are snippets from a paper by George Steiny, which talk about current limitations about building information modeling, and the necessity for in-place ambiguity in the design process, which current technologies cannot emulate. This is student work by myself and 2 other students as part of a design exercise in this class, where we take a typical object, in this case a Rubik's Cube, which was missing a few pieces, and we deconstruct it using a single component and reconstruct it and make a new architecture from that. And through this process, we discover certain things that BIM allows us to do that traditional or conventional methods do not, but also the limitations of these technologies. In another class at Studio, also taught by 𝗍𝗿𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍, students devise and deploy rules for transforming shapes in 2 and 3 dimensions, and explore the spatial, material, and programmatic potential. And so this is an example of student work by Dana, a second year student, where she starts with a skull and explores the spatial potentials, the lines, the curves, and devises a new architecture from that. This is another example from the year before by Naomi Collins-Julien, which was very similar and really shows the ways in which we transform these components or lines or geometries to create new spatial potentials. And so in these classes, she really thinks about computation and how computation can contribute to a future architecture that is unique.
So I will be talking about a studio that was taught by François. He graduated from the school a few years ago, and now he's teaching this studio class. And it's a great example of how we are pushed to think about the computational tools which are omnipresent in our practice, but that most of the time we are not forced to fully understand their impact on how we create architecture. And so the studio is really focused around this idea of a non-static architecture. And by using programming to create a goal-less game, students engage with this idea of unpredictability and in the creation of architecture, and how time-based processes such as information, the way someone would open the door, or all these things which rely on time are not represented well in our a fixed composition of architecture. And so in the dark drawing here at the top is an example of captures of one of these games, which was developed in processing. And at the bottom is a student's interpretation of such real-time processing. And further down, afterwards in the studio, students developed these speculative architectural model, which rely on simple architectural elements, such as curtain partitions, walls, or objects that we use all the time in architecture, to go beyond the single point in time architecture and think of it as more of a process. in our third years, we also have a class by Professor Simon Craig, which is called Energy, Environment, and Buildings, where we really think about sustainable building practices and how we use them. So we use water bath modeling to learn about various ventilation techniques, just as buoyancy ventilation, and afterwards we applied these principles to the fifth floor of the architecture building and looked at the impact that such a system could have on our building itself. We also looked at how embodied carbon in like traditional building techniques and how to build a more sustainable environment. Then the course was left open-ended for students to use these different techniques in various contexts. So for some students, it meant developing student center in Ireland and learning about the regional context and traditional practices of the spaces. And for others, it was about developing a new casino typology for Las Vegas, one of the most sustainable practices, and try to make it more sustainable with what we've learned.
So I'll talk a little bit now about the M1 Fall Studio that was led by Professor 𝗀𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗲, Simon Craig, and Daniel Leon, that are part of the new hires that Nick was talking about. The studio focuses on novel design methodologies for the organization and formation of architecture. It is combined with an advanced construction lecture course, which provides a theoretical basis for explorations in the studio. So the advanced construction class, instead of making us look at more and more complicated details, instead incites us to step back and look at the broader picture, considering sustainability and energy not only during the occupancy of a building, but in all stages prior to construction. So instead of looking at form, we're asked to look at formation, viewing a building as material flows converging on a site. And the studio itself is about designing these flows, taking into account their geography, carbon impact, human impact. So for example, for projects using wood, we're looking at life cycle of the forest, optimal harvesting. So this specific student project, they became a bit obsessed with optimizing CLT panel transportation. So considering maximum truckload, where everything was harvested, milled, and where the actual site was. And then they looked at the percentage of tree that was lost in milling and in offcuts. So they actually calculated how many trees they needed for the building. They mapped all of their panels on the CLT panel, the standard one that was made by the company they picked. And then all the implications of all this in terms of carbon. So they were calculating how much wood would be needed in the building to sequester the same quantity of carbon as emitted by the concrete and glass in the building. And even though all their structure was made of structural CLT panels, they came to the conclusion they would have needed 4 times the wood they were using to actually sequester as much carbon as was emitted. The studio was divided in modules. So one of the modules was led by Simon Craig that Olivier talked a little bit about. So we looked at flow sculpting using this water bath modeling technique. So in these models, the colored water is actually hot air. And this particular group had kind of an exciting result in their first water bath. They were able to generate a kind of layered cake of a very hot room, very cold room, very hot room. Even though all these rooms are connected, because of how the openings are positioned, you actually get very contrasted environment. So they based their whole studio project of last fall on that discovery, planning programs that needed warmer or colder temperatures depending on the conditions of each zone. So the whole goal of this is to reduce dependency on a chemical system to achieve desired thermal conditions. Another module of the course led by Professor 𝗀𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗲 was focusing on load path design. So we were creating these house of cards model where all the panels are structural CLT panels and basically generating space by playing with the structural system, so structure as space. So we're trying to avoid redundancy, so the structure makes all the interior partition, there's no need to add any. And on the right, it's a bit of how this structural system can be converted through an architecture by adding floor plates and then a building envelope.
So another, the supernatural initiative, which was started at Dalhousie University, has made its way to McGill too. They published a manifesto for a climate-engaged discourse in architecture school, so that we start integrating climate change as an important issue and that it's integrated in our curriculum. So students at Dalhousie reached out to students from McGill and we joined them in the movement. Recently, students from McGill produced posters which were posted all around the school. It's basically the manifesto itself, which is divided by various points and located around the school so that everyone encounters it. This was also done simultaneously at Dalhousie University, and in the future we are planning on having events simultaneously between the two schools and engage in developing new ideas about the subject.
So I'll talk just a bit briefly about the Fugger Island Community Workshop that was mentioned earlier. So there was an increased interest, like in I think many schools in Canada, in having design build projects. So in response to that, Professor Robert Mellon, who's retired now, began the Fugger Island Community Design Workshop in Tilting, Newfoundland. It's been running for 3 years now. So groups of students go to Tilting for a month and they design and build small-scale architectural interventions to service the community. So most of these interventions are meant to give back certain meaningful places of the community and make them accessible for older people. So most of the time there's like huge rocks or uneven ground they couldn't access. So by building these platforms and these paths, we're giving back access to a certain part of the community. So I participated in the 2018 edition and I'm going to take part in this summer's. Another design build project that took part at McGill last year under the supervision of Professor Michael Gemsrud was this outdoor stage. So it was a collaboration between the School of Architecture and the School of Music. And students from both faculties designed an outdoor performance pavilion that is meant for McGill University's bicentennial, which is it's going to move to campus this year, but it was assembled at Jardin Humanities in the 𝗣𝗿𝗀𝗀 last summer. So, and using locally sourced wood to try to put in practice ideas of traceability that we're discussing in the past. In relation to the theme of this year's CAFÉ, I mentioned briefly the Hackathon 𝗍𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀 project, which happened in 2017 and was led by a McGill professor, 𝗍𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀. We're repurposing discarded materials in the village of 𝗍𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 in Nunavik to design and build an outdoor sports pavilion, a shelter for skaters. So the project aims to enhance the public space to encourage community gathering around the skating rink and also to recognize the DIY design build culture of the region. Thank you.
Okay, wow, that's like a 2-hour snapshot of the energy and potential across Canada from many generations. So we've gone a little bit over time, but there was lots of fluff space in the afternoon, so not to worry. But I think we all might need a 3 to 5 minute break. We've loaded up the coffee machine in the foyer. So please take just 3 to 5 minutes, but then return to your table. There are table captains, University of Manitoba students at each of the tables, and we are going to transition into the Roundtable Consultations with the topic that is on the stand of your table. And this is also a time, if you are just 2 or 3 people at a table,